Hello, and welcome back to The Crew, which is part of the Next Chapter Woman conversations that we have here on YouTube. Today, we're going to talk about something that I think a lot of us don't really stop and think about often enough or long enough. That's this question. What did we think this stage of life was going to feel like? And what does it actually feel like once we got here? So, yes, we go through different stages. So that's the cue. First of all, it would be good for our audience if we defined what stage it is that we're talking about. And sometimes those stages are age, I think. Some are situational. Okay, I used to work and now I don't work. Some of them are relationships. Okay, I used to be married and now I'm not, or whatever that is. Let's try to set the stage for those of us, the people that don't know us intimately. And so we need to tell them what we're thinking about as we answer some of these questions that I've got written down that I wanted to cover today. I think many of us had an idea about what it would feel like when we got to where we are now today. And at some point, maybe a long time ago, we imagined what life might feel like when things slowed down a little, when responsibilities changed, when we had more time for ourselves and more space for ourselves. We imagined those things. And then life actually changed. And sometimes the feeling of it might not have been what we expected. So, in other words, the life changed and it wasn't what we thought that it would be. So, today I thought it would be interesting for us to just talk about that honestly and openly in this forum. Not what it should feel like. I mean, we all got our shoulds, but what actually that it felt like. So welcome, Anne. I'm glad you're here. And Anne and I are always remembering to turn our microphone off when we're not talking and on again when we are going to talk. So you just bear with us while we click some buttons. So, Anne, first question that I've got. When you thought about this stage of life years ago, what did you imagine that it would feel like? So, first of all, tell us what stage that you're talking about, maybe what stage you're actually in, or how you would define or verbalize that stage. And then what did you think that it was going to be in the past?
What stage? I am retired, so no longer working, full time. That is, I do bits and pieces of things that bring in some income. Therefore, can't be completely considered to be retired in the traditional sense. So I'm not sure people ever do retire in a traditional sense anymore. Um, so retired, and I am now single. Um, and I don't know how to classify the stage other than how I feel and how I've related to it with other things that I've looked at. And I can't remember the word, but I was looking at Indian as in Hindu belief system, because all of these are just beliefs, belief system. And it was the last stage of your life. So after you've done your growing up and getting settled in the world and having your family, and then proving yourself, accumulating money, riches, whatever you want to accumulate. I'm in the latter stage of that. Is how I view myself. Now that's only because I don't know what the hell's coming. So being on that stage coming, I have no clue. But I think it's the latter stage. And the question, what was rattling around in my brain as you were talking was, oh yeah, the question was, how did I think I would feel? I didn't. So before this stage came upon me, right? If I go back to when I was 16 and thinking, what's my world going to be like? What am I planning? Because, of course, you have to decide what you're going to do for university and all that kind of stuff, which was about the only time I ever thought about my future. And having got into the future and then just living the future and following the opportunities. I was in my head. So I wasn't thinking, how would I feel? I was thinking, what would I be doing? Right? What would I be doing? How would life look? What would the environment be like? It was those kinds of thoughts that I had, not any feelings that I had way back then. And then when my life took a dramatic change, I was only 43. So at 43, I was planning to do the RESPs and the RSPs and all getting all my ducks in a row. And then kabam, everything went out the window. And at that time, any dreams I had of having what I was building at that time, to me, was a secure future. I'm going to be secure. I'm going to be able to live comfortably on, the money that I'm putting aside for retirement. I had no idea what that was going to look like. Rush, right? It was a secure, safe future, safe and comfortable future is what I was building towards. How did I think how I would feel? No, no, wasn't into thinking about feelings at that time. Then after 43 and feelings started coming into it, it was kind of, how am I going to feel? How can I feel when I don't even know who I am? Right? So, because that had all gone out. So then it was a case of finding all of that. And it got to the point where, number one, it was incredibly scary as to what I was feeling at the time. Long story short, how I feel now in whatever stage I'm in is tremendous and amazing and nothing I could possibly have thought I would felt like at any other point in my life, unless I was 3.
And you always have such a gift, a gift of making those words come to life, actually. Really interesting. One of the things you touched on, you didn't say the word, but was identity. Like, who am I now? And you couldn't answer that question. Took time to work through that. So that's interesting, and that definitely comes up in a number of the podcasts that we do on this channel, because I think it's important at whatever stage of life, whatever chapter that we're in. As an aside, I was doing a thumbnail for one of the recent podcasts that I did. And, I like to put a bit of a picture in part of the thing just to cement what it is that's coming within in the thing. And this particular one, I had to do the title slide for topic. These topics that are talked about in there. And that's the picture that I came up with was an open book that had writing on one side. So goes along with the chapters that we talk about and next chapter woman. But the facing page had chapter 2, it wrote on there. And I thought, well, I'm not necessarily in just chapter 2. Depends on how you define a chapter, doesn't it? And so anyways, I did some editing on there, and I put under where it said chapter 2, I put chapter 3, chapter 4. So, okay, which chapter, are we in? So thank you for defining that for yourself, the chapter that you're in. My answer to that question is quite different than yours, because I really did imagine what life now in my 60s, 70s would be. And it ends up that I'm still in that chapter of figuring out what that's going to be, and how that feels and how it fits. But I had defined it as, okay, I would be, my family's grown up. They don't need me as much anymore. And I got great grandchildren, fantastic grandchildren, I should say, rather than great grandchildren. And my husband and I would enjoy life together, maybe traveling or doing things together. And so as I explore this chapter of my life, I haven't been retired for very long. I don't know what that word means, retired. So, but my days aren't as busy. I don't make them as busy as what they used to be. But I am not able to travel with the family contingent the way I had thought that it would be at this stage of my life. So this stage of my life also envelops building new relationships. And so a lot of people do that earlier on. Here I am at 70 and discovering what building new relationships look like. So I am still working through that. I think it might be a constant thing. So that's where I'm at. So now let's move on to maybe a little bit more feelings about we've discovered that you, for example, didn't think about this stage of life too much back then, but I know that you've been thinking about it a little more recently. So maybe it is an act of thinking through to when you did start to think about it. And when you actually got to the stage that you were planning, and you're ahead of me here for this, thinking about, is there something that surprised you most about the way you feel or the way you are at this stage?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I went into this, as I said, at 43, started looking at myself as a feeling person more than a thinking person. Because just to recap a little bit, when I'm 16 and planning my life, and I just read the other day that the first woman is going to the moon. Well, I was expecting to be on the moon. So it's kind of okay. Didn't come true. And so to get back to the question. So when I was finding myself, and that was whole scary, who the hell am I? Who the hell am I going to be? Who am I? Not who am I going to be? Because that's a should. So who am I, and how does that evolve? I had no idea how it would evolve. I had nothing to show me. I certainly, I mean, I read a lot of books, and at that time there weren't podcasts as much and everything, all the rest of it, but those kinds of things. But even if there had been examples of how I am now or how I feel I am now, I couldn't relate. There was nothing to relate to, because this is also really new and definitely different. Because my world went into a black hole. Hey, I'm not in the moon, I'm in a black hole. Oh, well, that's kind of cool. Anyway, yeah, my life went into a black hole. And any dreams that I had of the future, and those dreams were, as I said, the comfortable, secure place. It was more of an environmental thought than a feeling. All of those just went kaput. Literally, they had to disappear. And I felt at the time, and this is more of a feeling than a thought, so I felt at the time, what is the point of dreaming of the future? All those dreams just go kaput. So it's one day at a time. And it still is one day at a time. And I no longer predict anything particular for myself. You can make predictions about the world, etc., etc. But predict for myself how I'm going to feel in the future, no. Other than I feel much more comfortable in myself than I did, and much more resilient. One of the things that I wasn't was resilient in some ways, especially when it came to feelings or being able to survive on my own. Not having the things that I'd had. I got married at 20. So not having those things, which I had taken for granted in terms of someone to have your back, the shoulder to cry on, just having somebody there, present, witnessing my life, the springboard that I could go off and do my thing, right? That was the thing that was no longer there. And I didn't know how I could be without that. And now I am, and I'm not sure fully functioning is the right word, functioning in that. Without that, I mean, I always felt that I was the kind of person who could do anything. Well, that is absolutely not true now with, physical limitations and things. However, I feel in myself the feelings of I can do anything. I'm okay. Maybe that's a better way of describing it. I'm okay in myself. Yeah, that's where I am now. And, there are certain things that I wouldn't like to have to live through, but I know I can live through them now. Yeah.
Encapsulated the answers to 2 or 3 of my probes all at one time. So that was, definitely very in depth. One of the things that I'm hanging on to from a couple of the items that you've talked about is that word that comes to me about identity, and and how our definition of what our identity was back then and now, and maybe even the time moving through those various chapters or sub chapters, even as we move through from A to B to C. And so let's talk about that for a little bit. Let me ask it in this way. Did your sense of identity change in ways that you didn't anticipate? So that's assuming that we think our identity might change. So we can blow that apart or talk about it in what it means for us. But the sense of identity, did it change in ways that you didn't think? I think I know the answer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are identities which are, I would say, related to those stages or chapters in life, although I didn't necessarily relate to them in a way that might be traditional. I always thought of myself as a career woman. I was a career woman, whether a wife or a mother or um, I've never been a bag lady, but even if I've been in a bag lady, I would have identified Anne Tyree as a career woman. That was my identity. There was a time in my life where I thought, what's the worst thing that can happen? Oh, you can be a bag lady. Okay, I can do that. So, but I'd be a career bag lady. That is how I identified myself. And it took what is it, the Jungian thing, which is, the dark night of the soul, for that to change. And some very good practical experiences for me to have to go through. And I say have to because they were way outside my comfort zone. One of the things when I strived as this career woman is it's a striving, right? It's a pushing, it's a proving of myself. It's work, just being that person, right? And I hadn't had any concept of the work that took. Now, I was burnt out when I came from Ontario to Alberta, and I didn't even know that I was burnt out, but I certainly was at that time. And that was part of this process, or led up to this process. I actually don't know that one, of an identity crisis. I had an identity crisis. That's a word. I didn't realize it. That's actually what was happening. And so, well, one of the ones, just as an example here, one of the ones is I'd made a commitment to do certain things, like to attend public functions and things. And because of what was going on in my life, I was incredibly sad. And it was very hard for me to go into public afraid that I would cry. That was the one that made me realize my ideas of how life is are wrong. And the way I'd built my life, the Anne Tyree life, I call it, right? The way I'd built that life were on presumptions that were shallow. I'll say shallow, because the career woman stuff was all thinking, what do I have to do these various things and all the rest of it, right? And it wasn't who I couldn't express all of who I am. That's a better way of putting it. I couldn't express all of who I am. Now I express all of who I am. And that is such a safe feeling that I had no concept of previously.
Really interesting. Not to make a comparison of you to me. We know that we're two different people, and and two different things can get along quite well, actually. And for me, I didn't go through those same feelings as you did. I always was living, how do I put that? I was always living the life that I was helping to build. And so never, and that was together with family and close friends. So I never had a big change in all of those years. So didn't have to pause, as I didn't lose, if we use that word lightly, lose something the way you did at a younger age. I still got the opportunity to grow and be and do whatever it was that I wanted to grow, be, and do. So here I am at 70, still believing, well, I can do, I can do whatever I want to do, and that feeling isn't different than what I had, my whole life in whatever relationships I had before. So, yeah, quite different. The two scenarios. And one of the things that I'm always reminded of in conversations like this is how different this chapter of life can feel compared to what we imagined. Even mine being, with those strings still there, it is different than what I imagined back then. Some of the relationships have to change, things like still like that. I can still do what I want to do, but sometimes relationships need to change. And I also think how normal that is, how normal it is that we change or that we need to change. And that gap between the expectation and the reality is something that many of us experience, but we don't always talk about. I think that for me is a key. It's talking about it to find out that really is quite normal. Other people experience that too. And we don't always have to have all the answers all at one time. So to those of you that are listening in on our podcast today, if this conversation talked to you in a relevant way, there's a number of other reflections here on the channel that explore this same idea from different angles, especially around the uncertainty and the adjustment that can come with change. So you might enjoy, if that's the case, you might enjoy some of the conversations in the playlist called The Space Between Chapters. They explore that in-between stage of life when something has changed, something shifted, but the next chapter is still taking shape. And as always, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Put them down there in the comments. Take care, and bye for now. Oh, and thanks to Miss Anne for coming together with us yet again today. Bye for now.
It's a pleasure.